Hi everyone. This PowerPoint presentation is designed to introduce you to SPSS and also to show you how to access the cartoon data set that we're going to be using for pretty much all of our lab assignments, as well as how to run some basic descriptive statistics and how to just get used to working with SPSS. Now, whether you are choosing to use the SPSS versions for the lab assignments or the non-SPSS versions, I still strongly encourage you to listen and watch through this entire presentation. At the end of this presentation, the last few slides that are labeled output for lab 2, those are the material you're going to need to answer the questions for lab 2. Now, if you're doing the non-SPSS approach and you don't have access to SPSS, then you're going to just jump ahead when you're ready for it to those output for lab 2 slides in order to see the output and the material that you would get from SPSS in order to answer the 6 questions on lab 2. For those of you who are using the SPSS versions, I encourage you to listen through the entire PowerPoint presentation and try to sort of follow along once you get the hang of it with SPSS yourself and see if you can replicate the same output that we'll see at the end of this lab. That way, so even though for lab 2, there's going to be an SPSS version and a non-SPSS version on Beachboard, they're basically the same material because I want to make sure everyone, whether they're working with the software program or whether they're just using the output that I'm going to provide to you, I want to make sure everyone is comfortable with what we have. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to take a look at how to open the cartoon data set and then how to run some basic descriptive statistics. And then I'll show you the output that I would hope that you'll be able to produce yourself if you're using the SPSS version so that you can get a better understanding of everything. So let's go ahead and get started. So opening the actual cartoon data set. So as of right now, I'm planning to use just this one data set for all of our remaining labs. So labs 2 through 5. That data set, it's sad, I apologize for the clunky name, but it's called Cartoon Data F19 SP20 Combined. This file is available in the lab material area of Beachboard. Now you'll notice, and this is one thing to keep in mind, whether you have SPSS on your computer or you don't, or you're going to use it via the student virtual lab or whatever. The cartoon data file is what is known as a .save file, so .sav file. That's the format for SPSS data files. So just like a Word document is .doc or .docx, and then some .jpeg, PDF, you get the idea. Okay, so this .save is just the format that SPSS data files come in. Now you can only open the file if you have access to SPSS on whatever computer you're working with. So one of the things I encourage you to do, but even if you don't have SPSS, if you are planning to use the SPSS versions of the lab assignments, either because you've downloaded SPSS or you're virtually accessing it via the student virtual lab, I encourage you to go ahead and save that .save file to your own computer just so it's easier for you to find it and open it when it's time for you to get access to it to run the different lab assignments. Now, the first time you open SPSS statistics, what often pops up is this small screen that looks somewhat like this. Now, obviously, this is on my computer, so you can see some of in the recent files, you can see some of the different things that I've been working with over the past couple weeks, depending upon which version of SPSS you're using, whether it's 23, 24, 25, 26. I don't know if they've gone any further than that, but they may be slightly different, but the idea is the same. If you see this little pop-up window open up, just go ahead and close it because we're not going to use this shortcut method. We're going to actually open the data ourselves in order to get access to what we need. So once you've closed that pop-up window, a blank version of SPSS should look something like this. Now, this is sort of our data file. This is that .sav where we can start to enter in files. You'll notice there, this is blank. We haven't opened the cartoon data set, but once we open it, it will add data into this sort of template that you see. The other thing to notice here, and you may recall from the introduction to SPSS videos that I encouraged you to watch as part of Lab 1, that was available on YouTube. There are two different views in this sort of data file that you can view. Right now, if you look down at the lower left-hand corner, we are looking at the data view tab. So this is where we would actually see all the raw data. We can also click on the variable view tab, and that variable view tab shows us information about the specific variables. So if you open up one way or another, don't freak out because there are two tabs, and all you have to do is just click on either one and you're good to go. So how do I open the cartoon data set? So whether you have downloaded it to your computer and you know where it's at, so you can go find it, which drive or folder you have it in, or whether you are opening it from Beachboard, and when you click on that cartoon data set file in the lab material area, the drop down should give you an opportunity to click download. So however you're opening it, it should either, with the download, it may just pop up automatically. If you're opening up SPSS in this blank format like I'm showing here, then you want to go up to that file, and either where it says file that I have circled in red, or where you sort of see that that open folder. And then if you do the drop down, you're going to do file and then look for something to click that says open, and then it allows you to choose data. And then you go and find wherever you have stored that cartoon data set. And then once you've opened that, let's see what it should look like. So once you have opened the cartoon data set, and this is just, I downloaded it directly from Beachboard, and then I opened it, and mine happened to open just like this. And you can see here on this slide, what we have now is we're still in that data view. So what it has is it has each, in the far left, we have the various cases, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way down to 21, at least in my screen. And you're welcome to scroll through the data. I think we have 770 different cases in this particular data set. So we have quite a bit. And this is also why I've been talking about like the importance of us, we did some basic computing of descriptive statistics early in the semester, just with small data sets, like 6, 10, 15 different cases. But when we have 770 cases, you don't want to be doing things by hand. And that's the beauty of SPSS, because it's going to allow us to run basic descriptive statistics, and it's also going to allow us to run more advanced inferential statistics as we move forward with just a couple clicks of the button. So it's not too hard at all. So when you open yours, we see the first 21 cases. And then you'll notice across the top of each column, they have the names of the different variables that I have already entered in to create this data set. So we have the class. That's which class collected the data for me in the first place. Then we have the title. The title is the title of the particular cartoon. We have the episode. So some people, you'll notice some of them had an episode available, others didn't. So some of them, and they're different. Some of them may be blank, some may be there. We have the era. And so when collecting and putting together this cartoon data set, we were looking at popular children's cartoons from 4 different decades. We started with cartoons from the 1980s, and then we looked at cartoons from the 1990s, 2000s, as well as the 2000s and 10s. So if you scroll through this data set, you'll see that we've got a good mix of all of them. Then you'll start to see a handful of other variables. Vial5, SCR_CH_5. What are all these crazy things? Well, what I asked students to do when we compiled this was I asked them to measure 2 things in particular: the level of violence, as well as what I called the level of stimulation. And that was counted by the number of screen changes that were seen. So originally what we had was, I said, okay, I want you to go to whatever cartoons you choose, go to the 5-minute mark of the cartoon. And then I want you to watch 1 minute of that cartoon. So from minute 5 to minute 6. And then I want you to rank on a scale the level of violence you saw in that 1 minute. And that's what they have. That's what that Vile 5 variable represents, where the students' opinions about the level of violence they saw within a 1 minute snapshot. Then, to measure the total stimulation on the viewer, I asked them to do the similar thing, still watching that from the 5-minute mark till the 6-minute mark. And then I asked them to simply count how often the screen changed. So imagine you're watching a cartoon and you see, the characters, then you see it change to a different screen, then you see it change back to one. Whenever we saw a significant screen change, then they counted that. And I said that as sort of like that flashing light stimulation. How often, I wanted to know, have cartoons with advances in our ability to make cartoons and the technology behind them, do we see more quick screen changes, more stimulation to the eyes and the brain? And that's what we were getting at. So that SCR_CH_5 variable is capturing their measurement of screen changes. I then asked the students to repeat the same approach of measuring the level of violence as well as the number of screen changes at the 10-minute mark. So then you see the next couple of variables, you see the Vile 10 and then the SCR, etc. 10. You see those variables. This is so that we were capturing information from 2 points in the cartoon. Then the next variable we see is called app_age. I asked students, after viewing a segment of these cartoons, regardless of what sort of the recommended age may have been from the television or the television producers or the network or whoever was putting it out there, I said, what do you think would be the appropriate age to be watching this type of cartoon? And as you can see, they've got listing, and we created sort of an ordinal level variable that showed the appropriate age, and you can see some of the categories. Finally, and it's not completely shown in this screenshot, but we had what was known as a total violence score, which you see that TOT_VIOL. So that was total violence. And there's also sort of a total screen change, which is the next variable that's kind of cut off right now. But what I did to compute these is I averaged the Vile 5 and the Vile 10. I then averaged the screen changes 5 and the screen changes 10 to get a more comprehensive measurement of the amount of violence as well as the amount of screen changes within these cartoons. So that's what we see laid out here, just to kind of give you a background to what this cartoon data set was all about. Now, when you opened up your cartoon data set, you may have seen this, or you may have seen some slightly different things. So one of the things we have listed right now is we are showing what are known as the value labels. So look on this screen, pay close attention to the class variable, the era variable, and then what would be another one? Let's think about another one would be the app age, the appropriate age variable. You'll notice for each one of those, we have sort of like written out things like spring 2020, era 1990s, app age 5 through 7. You'll notice those aren't just single numbers. That's because those are variables that are at that nominal or ordinal level of measurement. So, but SPSS allows you to toggle between seeing what we call sort of the coding or the labels or the value labels that have been assigned to different numbers, as well as just simply the numbers that you saw. So let's go to the next slide. On this slide, this is the same screenshot with one minor change. What I did is I went up to the view, and you can see with the red arrow and the red circle, I clicked on view, and then I can shift between either showing the value labels or not showing the value labels. So if you have access to SPSS, you can practice this. You can go up there and click view, and when you get the drop down, there's something that says value labels, and you can either click it or unclick it. So now what I have done is I unclicked it, and you'll notice, look at class and era. Now all we see are numbers. And those numbers correspond to the different qualitative categories that I coded them to respond to. Same thing with the app age. You'll notice for person number 1, all of a sudden, it like app age, I think was 5 through 7 on the previous slide, but now that represents category 2. And we've seen this. You may recall from previous lectures when I said, okay, if the variable is current offense, I have to code it into numbers because statistics likes numbers. So I would say like 1 is violent, 2 is drug, 3 is property, etc. That's exactly the same thing that I did in SPSS. And on a later slide, I'll show you when looking at the variable view, how you can sort of either tweak or change or see the coding structure that are used or that is used for nominal and ordinal level variables. So hopefully for those of you who do have access to SPSS, you've been able to open the data set. And if so, great, you're ready to run descriptive statistics. For those of you who do not have access to SPSS, and those of you who may have had access but weren't able to successfully open the cartoon data set, just follow along with us from here just to get an idea of how, once you do get access to SPSS in the future, how you can kind of go through these steps to run the descriptive statistics that we're going to need for this lab assignment. Okay, so it all starts with clicking on Analyze. That Analyze, which is circled in red up at the top, is sort of one of our major go-to buttons. We click on that and it gives us a lengthy drop-down list of all sorts of statistics that we can run and statistical analyses and tests that we can run. It's really, really cool. Okay, so if you have SPSS, the way you would run these descriptive statistics is first you would click on where it says Analyze, then you're going to get a drop-down menu. Once you get that drop-down menu, you're going to click on the choice that says Descriptive Statistics. Once you click on that, another little side menu will open up and you're going to click on Frequencies. Once you've done that, let's see what happens. So once you have done that, Analyze, Descriptive Frequencies, like gone through what we saw in the last slide, you should have a box that opens up like that looks somewhat like what we see here. So this box should pop up, that's circled in red. Okay. And you'll notice, depending upon the default setting of your SPSS, my list, that left-hand box where it says class, title of cartoon, episode number, cartoon era, etc., mine is automatically set to show not the variable name, but the variable label, which is a much lengthier and cumbersome form of showing the information about the variable. I don't typically like working with that. So if yours pops up that way and you want to show a more simplified sort of variable name, then take a look at what we see here in purple. You can put your cursor anywhere over that sort of box, right click it, and then you'll get a choice where you can toggle and choose between display variable names or display variable labels. I typically like to show display variable names because it's just they're shorter and I can, once I've gotten used to them, I can work with them much quicker. So it's whatever you're comfortable with. And you'll see on, I think it's on the next slide or a future slide, that when you see this same box, you'll see that I've shortened it to display variable names. So let's go ahead and start running some descriptive statistics. Okay, so here what I've done is you can see this is that same little pop-up box that we saw circled in red on the previous slide. And yes, you can see on the left-hand side, I'm no longer displaying variable labels. Rather, I'm displaying variable names. These are those short names that I put for each of the sort of abbreviated names that I put down for each of our variables to make it a little bit easier to look at. So how do I start to run descriptive statistics? Well, the cool thing is, let's look at that red arrow and the information next to it. So you can move any variables that you wanted to analyze from the box on the left to that box on the right, that box that says variables. So all I did was I put my cursor on era and they would highlight, and then you'll notice in the middle of this box there's a little bit like an arrow in between the left and right hand side boxes. Not my red arrow, not the purple arrow, that actual like arrow from the SPSS screenshot. And once it'll point over to the variables box if I want to move it over there. So I move my era variable over there because I need that to answer one of my questions. And I also moved over the appropriate age. So you can do one variable at a time, or you can move all the variables over. Once the variables that I choose to run any analysis on are in that variables box, I can start selecting the appropriate statistics and or sort of graphical displays or charts that I want SPSS to compute and present for me. So you'll see down here, if we look at that long purple arrow and then the box or the information on the left of it, it says by clicking on the statistics and charts tabs, you can select the statistics and histograms you would like to run. So this allows me to get that information. So let's see how we do that. So what I show here is what the windows that will pop up if you click on the statistics or the charts tabs from the previous slide. So let's look at the information that's circled and pointed to in red. If I had selected that statistics tab, this box pops up. And you'll notice it's no longer you having to hand compute anything. Instead, it's simply point and click. You get to choose what type of statistics you want. And you'll notice that I have 3 different areas circled in red. And also, I'm hoping you recognize that these 3 areas sort of, or actually they exactly correspond to the 3 areas we talked about when we covered univariate descriptive statistics, right? We have up at the top, we have measures of central tendency, and I can ask SPSS to compute the mean, the median, the mode, etc. Down at the bottom on the left, we have measures of dispersion or variability. And there we see that standard deviation, the variance, the range, things that we've talked about. And then over there on the lower right-hand side where it says characterize posterior distribution, all sorts of fancy language, these are the shape statistics. And the 2 main ones that we could select are skewness and kurtosis. And if I want to have SPSS run those statistics for my particular variable, all I have to do is click them and you'll see the box checked, and then I can click continue and it takes me back to my previous box. The same thing occurs if we were to click on that charts tab. So you see where the purple arrow is pointing over to the little screenshot on the right-hand side, lower right-hand side. If I click charts, that pops up and they give you different choices like bar charts, pie charts. For us, our main one is histograms. So you can go ahead and click the histogram and it'll run it for you. You'll notice under histograms, it has an option where it says show the normal curve on the histogram. This allows you to sort of get an idea of how well your particular data would match or not match a normal curve. Typically, I don't worry about that in this class, but if you want to see it, sure, click it. You'll just see sort of a smooth, what a normal curve would look like relative to your data, just to see how much your data may deviate from a normal curve. I typically just leave that unchecked, but I would click the histograms for that. And then whenever you're in one of these boxes, either the statistics or the charts, in order to get out of it and continue, you simply click continue. Continue will close this box and take you back to that previous descriptives box, and then you just click OK and it will run your analyses. Once you have chosen to run your analyses, you will have a separate window open up. This is known as an output window. So a small fraction or section of an output window from what I just tried to run is shown in the screenshot on the lower left-hand side of this slide where it says frequencies and then data set and then statistics and then it's got information. Okay, so for those of you who have access to SPSS and are going through this work using our cartoon data set, hopefully the rest of these slides, if you follow along with the 6 questions in the lab assignment, you're able to replicate this exact same output. I won't be doing this for future labs, but for this first lab 2, I want both the SPSS users as well as the non-SPSS users to sort of make sure that they're getting the right information and seeing the right information. If you are doing the non-SPSS version of Lab 2, then the screenshots and tables and charts you're going to see from this slide all the way to the end of this presentation, that's the information you need to look at and use in order to answer the 6 questions on the lab assignment. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. So let's read through this slide. So output for Lab 2. Your output will be displayed in the output viewer, so it's a completely different viewer. Tables and charts from the output viewer can be cut and pasted into Word documents or PowerPoint slides. That's one of the cool things about SPSS. Even if you only have access to SPSS at a computer lab or on campus, once you have run the output, you can cut and paste any chart, table, whatever from the output and paste it into a Word document, into a PowerPoint presentation, which makes it really cool for when you're designing presentations or writing research reports. You don't have to recreate the entire table yourself. You can actually just cut and paste things. Okay, so let's take a look at question number 1 for Lab 2. And it says, what are the values of the modes for the era, cartoon era, and app age, appropriate age of viewers, variables? What categories do those modes represent for each of the variables? Okay, so let's break this down into 2 pieces. Let's look at that first question first. What are the values of the modes for those 2 variables? All right, so using information from the previous slides, I would go into that analyze descriptives frequencies. I would select era and app age. I would ask SPSS under that statistics tab to run the modes for those. Once I do that and I click continue and OK, I should have an output file or an output viewer pop up, and I should see information that matches exactly what we see in the screenshot on the lower left hand side. Now you're going to get more information too, but I'm just showing you the necessary stuff. Here what we have is a little descriptive statistics summary table, and you'll notice it has a cartoon era as well as an appropriate age of viewers, the 2 variables I want. It has the N, that is the valid number of observations. So there should be 770 for both of them. There are no missing ones, great. But where do I find the modes? Well, if I had selected the mode as a statistic I wanted to see, I should have, just like I see in that shot, where it says mode, and then underneath each one there is a value. That's all you're reporting. So it says, what are the values of the modes? So I'm not going to give you away the answers, even though I'm staring at them right now. But all you're doing is just reporting what the value of the mode is for cartoon era and what the value of the mode is for appropriate age of viewers. But there's a second question for number 1. It says, what categories do those modes represent? And it says, for example, 2000, ages 5 to 7. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, remember, cartoon era, 1980s, 1990s, 2000s, 2010s, that is a qualitative variable. Same with the appropriate age of viewers. That was one where I created sort of an ordinal scale for the appropriate age of viewers. So how do I know what the particular numbers? On my statistics table, I see numbers for the mode. I need to know what do those numbers represent? What group, what category for those variables do those numbers actually represent? How do I find that? Well, the best way is to go back to my main data file, and that's what we see in the screenshot on the right. If I move away from the data view, and you'll notice in that screenshot on the right, I have clicked on the variable view. So now this is no longer raw information about each of the responses. Rather, this is a listing and information about each of the variables. So for the variables that are at the qualitative level of measurement, I had to code them. The way that I know that I had to code them is look at the column that says values. You'll notice for class, there's something there. For title and episode, none, because those are string variables. And then for era, I have that highlighted, there's something there. And then you can look at the rest of them. In order to figure out how I coded the era variable, what you can do is if you click on the box where that is highlighted in yellow there, where it says era and values, you'll see a little square pop up. If you click on the little square, the window that you see superimposed on top of there that says value labels pops up. And in the bigger box, you can see how my coding structure. So 1 equals the 1980s, 2 equals the 1990s, 3 equals the 2000s, 4 equals the 2010s. That gives you my coding structure. So when I look back over at the screenshot on the left and I look at that cartoon era variable, so I see cartoon era and I go down and I look at the mode for cartoon era and you'll notice it says 1. Well, that second question that says what categories do those modes represent, I need to figure out what does 1 mean, right? 1 doesn't mean anything for nominal or ordinal. I need to know what it was coded to represent. So let's look back over to the screenshot on the right, and we see that a 1 equals the 1980s. So that's what I mean for this question, and I'll allow you to figure out appropriate age on your own. But for the cartoon era, if it says what is the value of the mode, I would say the value is 1. What category does that mode represent? It represents the 1980s, and that's it. So let's move on to question 2. So question 2 asks, what percentage of the sample was 1980s cartoons? And then I say, please report information from the valid responses. Okay, so how did I get this frequency table that showed up here? Well, when running my previous analyses where I was looking for the modes, and I went in and clicked statistics and followed what we saw on previous slides, one of the things that you may notice from a few slides back is that there is a little box when you're running, when you go to the frequencies, so analyze descriptive statistics frequencies, when that initial box opened, underneath the left-hand list of variable names, there was a little box that says like something like display frequency tables, and it was checked. So that will automatically show up. That's a default. That should show up automatically, and that's where I cut and pasted this from the output. So for those of you who are working with SPSS at home and actually running the analysis, you'll see these frequency tables pop up along with the statistics or charts that you chose to run, as long as that box that says display frequency tables still remains checked, which it should. Okay, so for those of you who are not working with SPSS at home, here is the type of what you would see in SPSS output. So for this frequency tables, what it does is it gives me a breakdown of out of the 770 different cases in this data set. As you can see looking at this table, if we look under the frequency column, we had 200 cartoons from the 1980s, we had 185 cartoons from the 1990s, and so forth. And then what I'm asking about though is what is the percent of that total sample that came from the 1980s. Well, where do I find that? Well, the frequency column is the raw number. The percent is in fact the percent, but the percent column is not always a reliable source because if you have missing cases for a particular variable, the percent column treats those missing cases as if they're their own unique category of the variable. And therefore, when you look at your percentages, they are not going to be an accurate reflection of the sort of what we would call the valid responses. So all that aside, the key takeaway is almost always when you work with SPSS, if you're reporting your frequency percentages for a particular variable, rather than looking at the percent column, look at the valid percent column. The valid percent column will only include the percentage for the cases that had an actual response to that particular variable or that question. So in this particular variable, we had full responses for all 770 cases, so we had no missing values. So you see the percent and valid percent columns actually have the exact same numbers. But it's still a good practice to get used to pulling information from the valid percent column. So when I asked what percentage of the sample was 1980s cartoons, you got to find 1980s, look at the valid percent column. There's a number in there, and without giving it away, you report that number. That's it. Question 3 says, what percentage of the sample was deemed appropriate for 11 to 14-year-olds? Please report information from the valid responses. So once again, this is very similar to what we saw on the previous slide. We once again have a variable that has no missing cases. So both the percent and valid percent columns happen to look the same, but still look to the valid percent column when reporting percentages for any particular group. So you just need to match up the 11 to 14-year-old value with the valid percent and report the number that you see there. Now, for questions 4 and 5, we're moving on to different variables. We're no longer just using the era and appropriate age variables. We're now using variables that are at that interval ratio level of measurement. So we're doing the total violence score, which has a short name of TOT_VIOL, and then as well as the total screen changes or stimulation, which is the TOT_STIM. So for those of you who are working with SPSS, you're going to need to go back a couple slides and think about, okay, how did I go and actually run my statistics? So remember, it's that analyze, descriptives, frequencies, right? So same thing that we did several slides ago. And then now you're going to put the TOT_VIOL and the TOT_STIM variables over into the variables box. And then you're going to go to the statistics tab and you're going to select the mean, the median, the standard deviation, and the skewness. Now, when I do this and I click continue and OK, my output will pop up. And here is an example of what I should see. In fact, this is exactly what you should see. One of the pieces of information that will show up in your output is a statistics table, so a descriptive statistics summary table. We have the very first sort of column of stuff gives us the name of statistics that we have, the sample size n, the mean, the median, etc. Then we move over to the center column. That's the total violence score. The numbers below that represent the value of the statistics that we asked SPSS to compute. And then at the far side, we see total screen changes. That's that TOT_STIM variable. And same idea, we see the values of the statistics that we asked SPSS to compute. So for you, all you need to do, if I say what's the mean, the median, standard deviation, and skewness, just look at the mean row under each variable, find the value, and report the value. There's no computation needed. It's that simple. And you can see we have mean, median, standard deviation, skewness, and you'll also notice it says underneath there standard error of skewness. For this particular question, I'm not asking for the standard error of skewness. I'm just asking for the skewness value or statistic itself. And finally, we're asked to run some charts. And the charts are run for the TOT_VIOL and the TOT_STIM variables. So once again, if you're doing SPSS at home, go through that analyze, descriptives, frequencies, etc. Pick these two variables, go to the charts tab and select histogram. And then when you go through and click OK on it, this is what you should see popping up somewhere in your output. So what we have here, and these are actually two pretty good pictures to give you an idea. So I tell you to run histograms for the TOT_VIOL and TOT_STIM variables. Well, if you're doing the non-SPSS version, here is the information you need. Okay, so you have it right in front of you. And then you have three sort of sub-questions to answer. So looking at these, and think back to our previous lecture about skewness and shape, you should get an idea of what type of skewness you sort of see in each one of these histograms. And then one of them appears to have a little bit more skew than the other, at least just visually. So that's what I'm asking in 6A. Which variable appears to be more heavily skewed? Is it the total violence variable, or is it the total screen changes variable? And then the follow-up is, what type of skewness does that particular one have? Does it have positive skewness or does it have negative skewness? And then finally in part C, for whichever variable you chose to be more heavily skewed, provide at least one piece of statistical evidence from the statistics output table that you used in questions 4 and 5 that supports your answers to questions 6A and 6B. So remember, I told you when we analyze skewness, I said there's 3 ways you can sort of assess the level of skewness of a variable. You can look at a histogram, which is what we're doing right here, but also you can look at various statistics. Remember, you could talk about the relative positioning of the mean versus the median. So maybe you want to choose that. Also, you can just look at the skewness statistic itself. So that's what I'm getting at in 6C is I want you to pick one of those other sort of statistically based choices to see whether or not it supports your answer about which one has a heavier level of skewness. So hopefully this gives you a basic introduction to SPSS. For those of you who are working with SPSS, do your best. If you're having problems, let me know. But if you're working with the same data set, you should be able to replicate this same output for this lab assignment. For those of you who are not working with SPSS and are choosing to do the non-SPSS version, the output that you see here, as well as the last couple slides, is the output that you will need in order to answer each one of these 6 questions. So for all of you, take care, and we'll see you at the next lab.